In this video, we're going to take a look at combat stances. Now, what the One Ring does differently than other top role-playing games is that at the start of any round of combat, whether it's first or middle rounds of combat, player heroes have to choose a combat stance. And this is kind of the general attitude that their player hero is taking when in combat. There are two classes. One is ranged, one is close combat. Close combat has three stances. Ranged only has the one, which is a rearward stance. You're using some type of ranged weapon, whether throwing a spear or an axe, a knife, a rock, or using a bow. For close combat, there are actually three stances. There's one that's called forward, one that's called an open stance, and defensive stance. Forward stance is you're not that you're fighting recklessly, but you're not thinking defensively. You're on the attack. Your mind is focused on looking for an opportunity and a weakness in the enemy, and the opportunity to strike when they least expect it, or take an advantage of some mistake of theirs. So when you're fighting and you're rolling the feat die plus any ranks that you have in a combat proficiency for your close combat weapon, you get to add in 1d. On the flip side of this, however, all combat attacks against you by adversaries, any adversary that are attacking you, also gain 1d as well, because you're just not thinking defensively, you're just going for the attack. So when you're in forward stance, characters with a high level of endurance or a high armor value, carrying a shield so you get a higher parry rating, or have a high wit score and then subsequently a higher parry rating, then those characters probably are more apt to be going in the forward stance so that they can fell their opponents quicker and faster. As with all combat stances, there's also what's called a combat task. So if you choose to not attack and you want to use one of the skills associated with whatever stance you're taking, you can do that instead. And we'll go over in depth the tasks shortly. But the combat task for the forward stance is intimidating the foe, trying to make them wary in some way to give a disadvantage to their attacks against you or any of your party. The next combat stance in the close combat range is the open stance. You fight without sparing yourself, but giving proper attention to your enemy's actions. This is essentially your default stance. And it gives you no advantage, but no disadvantage either. And there's no advantage or disadvantage to the adversaries that are attacking you. Very simply, self-explanatory. Combat task is called Rally Comrade. So you're going to use this your Enhardened skill to kind of rally the comrades around you or around one of your fellow compatriots, and to fight off the enemy, giving you some type of advantage. And the last close combat stance that can be chosen by a player here is the defensive stance. You fight conservatively, trying to protect yourself or others and in holding your ground. So basically, what you do, what's the advantage of that? Well, all close combat attacks aimed at you lose the one dice. So if an adversary is attacking you, they have 3 success dice to roll. They get to lose one of those and they only roll 2. So there's a less chance of you actually physically getting hit. On the flip side, any attacks that you do against the adversary subsequently lose the 1d as well. So this is a bit of an issue for a starting character, obviously, and if you have, only say 1 rank or 2 ranks in a combat proficiency and you take the defensive stance, the chances of you are hitting are going to be really low unless you have a really low strength TN target number, or unless you spend judiciously like a hope point to add extra success dice, or somebody does a combat task that gives you the extra dice. So this is kind of your tanking maneuver. So a dwarf with a heavy armor, a shield, this might be a good option to kind of get in there, get in the front line, do that defensive stance, and everybody else do the damage for you. The combat task associated with the defensive stance is protect companion. So basically you're using your battle skill to cause you to protect a comrade that's somebody in your company that's nearby you in a forward stance or a close combat stance that you're protecting them, giving them an advantage. The next is your range combat, your rearward stance. So this basically, you're only able to use, like I said before, your ranged weapons, so throwing a spear, a rock, a dagger, an axe, using a bow, and you can only be targeted by attackers using a similar weapon. So none of the adversaries engaged in close combat with your fellow company player heroes can actually engage with you. The only adversaries that can are the ones that have some form of a ranged attack. The combat task here is called prepare shot. So basically you're taking that one round, aiming carefully, giving you an advantage to your next attack roll when using the ranged weapon. Let's take a look at now the combat tasks themselves. As you can see, I've got these little blue tabs. I have the first edition of the book from the Kickstarter, and therefore this is just identifying that there's errata in some of these stuff that has changed since the printing of this copy. So the combat tasks are, again, is something where you as a player hero can choose to do instead of making an initial attack. In the Intimidate Foe combat task for the forward stance, you as a brave warrior is fighting in the forward stance can attempt to intimidate their foes to try to make them waver, break, or even flee. If you choose this, you roll an awe roll as your main action for that round. So there is an errata on here. So basically what happens is, on a successful roll, the enemy's morale has been shaken and all opponents with a Might 1 are made wary on their next attack roll. If the roll produces a single success icon, a Tengwar, then also all adversaries with Might 2 suffer the same penalty. If the roll produces 2 successes or more, the penalty is applied to all adversaries in the fight regardless of their Might score. Enemies made wary by the Intimidate 4 are now wary on all combat rolls for the length of the round instead of only the next attack roll. So what's the difference here is this remains the same, but it's for all combat rolls for the length of the round instead of the next attack roll. Meaning that it's not just for their attack, but also for doing any type of protection test. So this actually could prove very useful in felling foes through piercing blows and them failing protection tests because they've been made wary. And what wary means is that every time they roll a 1, 2, or 3 on a success dice, it counts as 0. So keep that in mind. Rally comrades. This is the combat task for the open stance. So fighters keeping an open stance are always heedful of their surroundings and may attempt to rally their comrades when the battle is wearing them out. Only one player hero may choose to rally comrades in any given round. To do so, the acting player makes an enhearten roll as the main action for the round. So you choose, instead of attacking with your sword or axe, you enhearten, you're trying to rally your comrades. On a successful roll, all members of the company fighting in the forward stance gain 1d on their attack rolls in the following round. If, however, your result produces 1 single icon, then it's also for anybody in the open stance. If there are 2 or more icons, the bonus is applied to all player heroes in a close combat stance. So it's a unique feature where you're in open stance, you rally your comrades. Initially, if you just succeed in no success icons, it's just applying to anybody in the forward. If you roll 1, it's anybody in forward plus anybody in open stance, including yourself. And then if you get more than 2 success icons on your success dice in that roll, then everybody gets the bonus, which is pretty neat. So the next combat task is for the defensive stance. It's protect companion. So basically you're going to protect somebody that's in another close combat round. So, you move up to somebody, you raise your shield, you parry or you help to block an incoming attack, or you try to get in between an adversary and the other player hero. Now, initially, this was all based on a battle roll, but they've switched it now to an athletics roll instead of battle. So to do so, the acting player makes an athletics roll as the main action for the round. On a successful roll, the next attack aimed at the protected player hero loses 1d plus another 1d for each success icon rolled. Whereas the other combat tasks kind of focus more, globally. It affects more than one hero, one adversary. This is very specific. This is just protecting the one. And therefore, if you get more success icons, basically, you might even nullify any success dice rolls for the adversary, and they only roll the feat die into attack. So it really limits the ability for them to land some type of a hit on that character. For rearward stance, your combat task is called prepared shot. And so you basically said you're taking aim, you're taking the time to get a carefully aimed shot. It's like you're almost calling to hit, a weak spot, or like in the Two Towers, target the neck or underneath the arm. That's the weak point in the armor. So you're taking careful aim. That's what you're doing in that round. So to do so, the acting player makes a scan roll as the main action for the round. On a successful roll, the attacker gains the 1d on their next range attack, plus another 1d for each success icon rolled. So the more ranks you have in bow, adding an extra hope, for instance, you doing the gain shot. I mean, you could really roll a lot of success dice, potentially increasing your chances for a wound, heavy blow, and felling even a high endurance or a high adversary adversary, and felling them in one shot, much like what Legolas would do. Now, just to kind of tie up regarding the stances, the fly you fools rule about fleeing from combat. If you're engaged in combat, like ranged player heroes can basically disengage from range and flee, easy. But if you're in a forward stance and you are wanting to flee, there's a couple of steps that you have to do. So the two options. If you're unengaged, you have to first assume a rearward stance and then choose to escape when the turn to act comes. No roll is required to do so. The same applies to any adversaries who choose to stand back and thus remain unengaged. Again, simple. Otherwise, if you're engaged, you have to assume a defensive stance, rolling your attack normally. If the attack roll is a success, you actually don't inflict any damage, but narratively, you block a blow or you trip the adversary up, you then disengage, and then you manage to leave the battlefield. If your attack roll fails, you're still engaged and you're still in combat. So that's kind of how it works. If you wanted to get a little bit more on that, you can check out my videos on combat, and then also the combat diagram, which helps to kind of visualize that a little bit better for you on the table. If you liked this video, you did find it helpful, please like, comment, share it with your fellow new players or new lore masters. And then, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. I'm Ryan of the North. Thank you for watching.